Wow, I see him in a little bit. I was wondering what. Hey, how you? Hello?
And keep it moving.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello, who is this?
This is Jennifer. How you doing? You know I'm up here in Philly, but I was looking for you last week at the summit meeting, and I was in the room saying, "Where's Minnie the Wolf? Where's Minnie? Where is he at?"
I was there. I was just I was in the background.
Because this is Jennifer. You know I'm up here in tri-state Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Yeah, but I tell them Georgia my chapter. I'm an 18.
Exactly.
I told them I'm a Grady baby. Georgia chapter is the best in the nation, and I tell them all that.
We love
our tri-state chapter though too. We love them all.
Tri-state has nothing on ATL. Absolutely nothing. But they're all part of the Lupus Foundation of America. But I will say that Georgia certainly stands out.
Oh, you're awesome. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That's because of so many great efforts, so many great people on this call.
That's right. And Terry, you do a phenomenal job. And the other one, what's her name? Alita does phenomenal. I missed Kim the other day. And my cousin is Derek Jackson, State Rep Derek Jackson. I think yeah, that's my cousin. So he usually, I think, participates with you all during the summit time. Yeah. So I just wanted to check in. I did the national 2 weeks ago on my side. Even though I don't deal with the chapter, I still support I support the effort. So I will, because you all really will be talking to Georgia legislators, and that's why I came in early. I wanted to come in, try to come in before everybody else, because I didn't want to be disruptive. But only other call that, and I do have some other alliances there. My cousin sits on Superior Court, so, and all my family is Morehouse and Spelman. And I am on your calls with Dr. Lim, and I am now, yes, I am at the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, they the best. That's where I'm at. And so Dr. Worth and all of them are my physicians, but I listen to Dr. Lim. Every other Sunday, I try to make it my point because he is on point. He's one of the leading experts. So that's why I say Georgia takes a trailblaze, because you've got a dynamic group there that really hits the pulse. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for joining in and doing that. I think we're going to get started here. And when we get started, we're going to mute all the lines except for our first presenter, who is Chris Reed. So thank you, Jennifer. And Jennifer, let's talk, okay?
Certainly. We're going to, okay. I will, Terry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all you do and for your kind words.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Unmute yourself, Chris.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. Want to first thank you for being a part of our digital advocacy series across Georgia tonight. And I I hope most of you were able to participate last week. We had a wonderful group of people to participate and listen to all the wonderful things that both Representative Schofield and Representative Rich had to tell us, as well as, impart knowledge on us. And so we want to continue this effort and continue this movement to really educate ourselves more about, how can we make a difference? How can we be a better advocate in Georgia as people whose lives have been impacted by lupus? So I want to thank all of you for being on this call tonight. It should be a really, really wonderful night. Just a few housekeeping rules. All of you will be on mute, just so that we do not interrupt our speakers this evening. If you do have questions, there will be a question and answer session later on in this hour. And if you do have questions, just type them in the chat box on your screen, and we'll be able to review the questions, and hopefully I'll be able to ask a few questions to our primary speaker, our main speaker tonight. Please remember that next Thursday, we are going to hold our third session, and that will be Thursday, March 25th, in which we'll really be talking and learning more about how to speak to our legislators. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. Before we begin, I want to first thank the Lupus Foundation of America, Georgia chapter, and their staff, CEO Terry Iman and Destiny Alphabet, who both work tirelessly 7 days a week to make sure that we as patients and advocates are taken care of and that our needs are met. And we really couldn't do all of this without them. And I certainly couldn't do what I do and enjoy what I do without collaborating with the two of them on a regular basis. I must give a definite shout out to my co-chair of advocacy, Alita McLean, who's on the call as well. She's a great person to bounce things off of. She has so many wonderful ideas and so many more resources than I do sometimes, that it's amazing to work with her. We've been working together on advocacy for a number of years now in various capacities, and I definitely could not do it without her. And I wanted to thank the other members of the advocacy committee. Some of you are on the line right now, and we as advocates, we all know that there's a lot of work that goes into going down to the Georgia State Capitol every year, but definitely I could not do it without the support of just so many ambassadors who work with patients and caregivers who are walking around the Capitol, to organizing T-shirts, to getting the word out. Just couldn't do it without a lot of them. And given COVID, we haven't been able to collab as much as we used to in previous years, but it's great to see some of them on the line and see them. Some of you I haven't seen in a year, really, so it's great to see all of you. I also want to thank our sponsors today, GSK and Us and Lupus. I have our representative from Us and Lupus, who's on the call now. She's just an amazing woman. Anytime I need her assistance with the project that I'm working on, she's there to give her input. She's engaging. She has a background in the medical field, so she really, really, truly understands a lot of what we as patients are going through from multiple standpoints. And so I'm going to give her a chance, Miss Alicia Griffith, to just say hi and tell a little bit about herself and Us and Lupus and the wonderful program that they have at GSK.
Thank you, Chris. I have to say your words are way too kind. It is a pleasure to be here tonight, and I am so looking forward to hearing some of the ideas that you guys have. GSK is still so very committed to supporting the Georgia Lupus Lupus Foundation of America and the Georgia Lupus Education and Awareness Committee that you guys serve on. You guys have done so much, and I heard one of the callers say earlier that Georgia is basically the standard. And I actually tell people that all the time. I cover about 9 states in the role that I am in, and I am frequently sharing information with those other organizations about the good things that you guys are doing in Georgia. And so I just hope that I'm able to continue to support you in all the ways that matter to you and to your patients, to anyone that is living with lupus. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Alicia. We hope to see you soon. I hope we get have some in-person events, hopefully by the end of the year, so we can see each other and figure out what ways we can work together again. So looking
Chris,
forward to it.
I'm telling Terry that all the time. I'm just like so ready to get out and connect with people. Enough of this homebound stuff, I say. So we got to get this COVID thing under control so that we can get back and connect. Yeah.
We must. Well, good to see you. I want to also thank you, as all of the ambassadors who are on the call, all of the advocates who are on the call, the patients, the caregivers, all of who really make all of this possible. The foundation could not exist. The chapter could not exist without the hard work of its volunteers, without the hard work of you as patients and caregivers, as advocates. And so we must always remember, this lupus has brought us all together, certainly has brought us all together, but it's our mission and our desire to eradicate the world of lupus is that which really makes our bond really strong. So I want to thank you for that. I want to give Terry mentioned the young lady on the screen right now last week, and I kind of looking at a little bit of information about our speaker tonight, our keynote speaker, and about her organization. It really kind of brings this entire project home to me in a way. The young lady on the screen is from Macon, Georgia, and has relocated here to the Atlanta metro area because there are no pediatric rheumatologists in her area of the state, and so she's receiving treatment up here. But one of the aspects and one of the things that has been a mainstay, I guess, in my mission to work with people dealing with lupus is access to healthcare, equal access to healthcare, equal access to knowledgeable healthcare. And I'm sure many of you have been able to participate in a telemedicine call with a doctor over the course of the last year, or participate with a nurse practitioner or a PA, using some sort of electronic equipment, whether it be your phone or your computer or a combination of the two. And we've all been forced basically to be involved in this kind of mechanism to really diagnose and treat conditions that we have. And it's a system that many in the healthcare community want to further explore. And one of my missions, certainly as an individual, but also with my involvement with Lupus Project, is really to see if we can encourage more education and more awareness and more studies into how telemedicine can be used to diagnose and treat lupus, particularly for people like the young lady on the screen who can't exactly go out her front door and go, a few miles to see her doctor. She has to come up, 3 hours away to get to actually see a doctor. So it's important. It's certainly important. And sometimes I feel pretty privileged to live in Metro Atlanta area where I have my choice of doctors, but we don't all have that opportunity. And so it's kind of fortuitous to have Laura Colbert on the call tonight to discuss advocacy in Georgia and what it means to be an advocate. Just to tell you a little about Laura, I've heard Laura speak a few times. She's a very good friend to the Lupus Foundation of America Georgia chapter. She's spoken to some of our support groups. At our support group retreat, she's spoken at some of our advocacy days, and it's great to have her on the call. Laura is the executive director of Georgians for a Healthy Future. And I'm just going to read a quick sentence, well, 2 sentences about what the organization is, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Laura and what makes her so special. The mission of the Georgians for a Healthy Future is to build and mobilize unified voices, visions, and leadership to achieve a healthy future for all Georgians. Their vision is of a day in which all Georgians have access to quality, affordable health care they need to live healthy lives and contribute to the health of their communities. And one thing that I think that inspires me the most is one of their values, which is everyone benefits from a healthy community. One of the things that I like to tell people when I'm speaking to them about lupus is that lupus has both not only a physical and health impact on the state of Georgia, but a financial impact on the state of Georgia. And if certainly if we let it have such an impact on Georgia, then it's not good for anyone in the community. And that's why, you know, it's important to me that we all cooperate and collaborate and do what we can to share the resources that we have together. Laura is, as I said, she's the executive director of Georgians for a Healthy Future. She holds a bachelor's in science and education from the University of Georgia, where she studied biomechanics. She has a master's in public health from Emory University, where she focused on health literacy and social determinants of health. Laura is also a master of certified health education specialist in this state. She was formerly, well, let me say this. She sits on several advisory boards, two of which are the Georgia Department of Community Health Medical Care Advisory Committee, and she previously served as a board member of the Georgia Society of Public Health Education. Laura began her work with Georgians for a Healthy Future as a community outreach manager, and now she comes to us as its executive director. So let's join me in welcoming Laura Colbert, Executive Director of Georgians for a Healthy Future. I'm really looking forward to what she has to say. And feel free to write down your questions in the chat so maybe we can discuss after she speaks. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I particularly love being placed on a background with like lightning behind me. I feel like a little superhero situation happening. This is just very empowering. So thank you all for having me, and it is a real pleasure to be here. You know, we have worked for a long time in partnership with the Lupus Foundation, and you all are always good partners to us, and we try to really return the work and the mutual feelings, and so thank you for having me tonight. So Christopher invited me this evening to kind of talk about, about advocacy in Georgia and about what it means to be an advocate. And so I guess I thought I'd start with a few stories about how I came to advocacy, and then I will do my best to answer the question about what it means to be an advocate. I think that answer is a little different for everyone, but I think I have a good sense at this point, so I'll try to lay out that for you, and my guess is that many of you will fall into that definition. So I have, as Christopher said, I have been at GHF since 2014, which means I've been kind of a paid professional advocate for about 7 years. But my advocacy started a long time before that. And I'm sure for many of you, you can kind of think back about your first advocacy experience. For me, I was in high school. I went to high school in suburban Kentucky, so South Central Kentucky and Bowling Green, if any of you all are familiar. And in the early 2000s, the Kentucky State Legislature was threatening to cut education funding. So, as it's been a number of years now, so I don't remember exactly why education funding was being threatened. It could be that we were in an economic crisis. I have a hard time remembering these days, but teacher salaries were on the line. Our teachers' pay was going to be cut, and students across the state organized this big statewide march at the Capitol in Frankfort, Kentucky, which was about 2 hours away from where I lived. I really, really wanted to go. I had friends that were going, and there was going to, you know, be a whole caravan up there. But my mom wouldn't let me. She was nervous that I would end up on a quote government list somewhere. She was very clearly a baby boomer who kind of grew up under the shadow of Hoover's FBI and its many lists of you know, people who had aggrieved the government in some way. So I didn't get to go. But I did call my state legislators. I expressed my opinion about the, you know, funding cuts. I followed up with, at the time, written letters. We had emails, but it wasn't kind of a super common form of communication at the time. And that was kind of it, you know, that the students had their march. You know, I communicated with my electeds in the ways that many of us are familiar. And at this point, now that, you know, it's many years later, I don't remember if our activism made a difference or not, but I do remember the feeling of being involved in that. And it felt like the right thing to do. It felt really good to be a part of a group that was working for something towards a goal that we knew was, you know, was right and moved the state in the right direction. So that was my very first advocacy experience. It's still, you know, with a couple of fuzzy details, it's still, I can recall it very, very easily, and still kind of influences of how I do my work now. And then after that, there were a couple of other experiences that kind of pushed me towards advocacy, and specifically health advocacy. One is, you know, I was already interested in health. So I as you all heard in my bio, my background, my undergraduate degree is in exercise science with a focus in biomechanics. So I was already studying health and very interested in that as a field. But I graduated from UGA, and I was working, and I was uninsured. This was pre-Affordable Care Act. So I was uninsured, couldn't afford good insurance. So I just went without, and I got sick. I was working with kids, so there were a lot of germs around. I came down with what I think at the time was strep throat. And I just felt, you know, just terrible, super crummy. It was one of those like moments that you just sit on the floor and you wish your mom was there to take care of you, kind of that kind of sick. And I called around, you know, I'm a college student living in Athens, and I called around to a bunch of doctors' offices to see if I could get an appointment. Nobody would see me because I was uninsured and I was not an established patient. And I didn't want to go to the emergency room because I knew it would be expensive, and I couldn't afford it. And it was just really like frustrating and hurtful. And I remember crying and, you know, just being really feeling like I didn't have a choice about taking care of myself. I did end up going to the urgent care and spending most of a week's pay on getting a strep test, and then the medications that come after that. So, you know, in a week I felt better, but it was not an ideal experience, and it just, you know, felt really bad. And it wasn't any, you know, obviously that experience, a lot of us have had it, and it wasn't anything, you know, so unusual. It wasn't like I was in a terrible car crash or, you know, anything, but for some reason that really stuck with me, and I still can feel like very viscerally like how I felt in that moment when I couldn't kind of get to a doctor when I needed to see one. And then after that, I had kind of two work experiences where I worked with kids and families in two different parts of Georgia. And the kids and families came across income spectrums with a variety of health needs. Some of them were very healthy and made comfortable livings. Others, you know, didn't have a car, needed transportation to get to our programs, and some had, you know, very complex chronic diseases. And in both of those situations, I kind of saw families who did everything right. They followed all of the kind of instructions. They came to like the health programs that they were part of, and yet they couldn't quite make any progress towards improving their health because their communities didn't have the health education or the systems or the infrastructure that they needed to have healthy, thriving lives. They, maybe their schools were held in trailers with without like air conditioning, or they had no healthy food options near them, or the parents had to travel out of their communities to get to a decent paying job, that kind of stuff. So we just saw them kind of hit the same systemic barriers in both of those, kind of experiences as I worked with those families. And what I really came to understand was that where people live and the circumstances in which they live are very influential, if not determinative, of their health and their ability to be healthy. And that to me didn't feel fair or right. And so, after the second job experience where I kind of saw the same pattern that I had seen earlier, it really, I'd always kind of had an interest in advocacy, but it really prompted me to kind of move towards doing it professionally and kind of spending my my career doing that. So luckily I was able to, through friends who I knew at the Capitol, I was able to volunteer for one legislative session. And I worked for Stacey Evans and did just some like basic copy editing and like some basic policy analysis for her and her staff during the legislative session, and that gave me kind of enough experience to qualify to come work at Georgians for a Healthy Future when there was a job opening. And so so I came over, as you all heard, as kind of the community outreach manager, and that was kind of how I got into advocacy, is kind of having these experiences, feeling like it wasn't like the system wasn't set up for people to succeed or to be healthy, and then kind of trying to develop some skills so that I could be a part of the system to fix that. So this summer, I will have been at GHF for 7 years. That means, I guess that's lucky number 7. So it means I've been through 7 legislative sessions, or almost through 7 legislative sessions. We've got till the end of the month anyway. And it means we've had a lot of, or I've seen a lot of, trials and successes and failures in my own advocacy and in others.
Thank you.
So hopefully by this time, I think I should be able to, or it seems like I should be able to answer the question about what it means to be an advocate. But as I mentioned at the top, I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think I definitely have some ideas about what it means to be an advocate at this point. First, I think kind of the defining feature of an advocate is that advocates are really clear-eyed about justice, right? So whether that's health justice or economic justice or any other kind of justice that is not currently the kind of status quo, advocates have a real clear-eyed vision about kind of what that looks like, and then they work towards that through policy and systems change. So they use our kind of structures and laws and policies to try to build justice. And for me, as I was thinking about this, kind of what does my version of justice look like? I came up with kind of two things for me. One is that I believe that if you live in a body and you have a mind, that you are inherently deserving of the care and resources and support it requires to care for that body and mind. And I'm sure that you all, people living with chronic diseases or family members of people living with chronic diseases, that, you understand that it's not just about kind of the immediate healthcare, that it's also about kind of that resources and support part too. So I know we have, in the US, we have a lot of conversations about like who's deserving of healthcare, and maybe it doesn't come in that kind of phraseology, but just by kind of existing as humans, my belief is that we deserve the care and resources and support to be able to take care of those parts of ourselves. And I guess my second belief about kind of what health justice looks like is that your circumstances and where you live should not be predictive of your health and wellness or your ability to be healthy and well. And as we very clearly can see in the data, that's just not the case in the United States, and it's certainly not the case in Georgia. Often the zip code that you live in determines, how it determines everything as basic as your life expectancy. So we clearly have a lot of work to do to kind of get towards that that vision of health justice here in Georgia. So those are kind of two of the things that, like, if we get to those places with our health system, then I think we'll be very close to that kind of vision of justice that lives in my mind. Although maybe by then it will look a little different. I don't know. And I think pretty that system or that vision of justice that is required to be an advocate, that's often really supported with a very strong set of principles that kind of drives, that helps people drive towards that vision. And at GHF, we articulate those principles as both as the values that kind of undergird our mission and vision, but also as our kind of priority focus areas and in our policy priorities. So at GHF, we have kind of 4 priority areas. One is that we should get Georgia covered. So every Georgian should have an insurance card in their wallets, not because we think insurance is inherently good, but because in the US that is kind of what opens the door to the health system, right? That we should increase access to care. So, we at GHF understand that a health insurance card does not mean that people get the right care at the right time and in the right place. And just as Christopher was talking about with the beautiful little girl who moved from Macon to Atlanta, there's a lot of things between kind of being insured and getting that care, the appropriate care that a person needs and in the appropriate setting. Our kind of third principle or kind of focus area that we operate or that we kind of steer towards is enhancing value. And that's kind of a wonky way for us to say we want to balance quality of care and equity of care while driving down price. So we know that the US healthcare system is super expensive. It produces some of the worst health outcomes and the most inequitable health outcomes. So we want to improve the equity and the quality of the system while driving down cost, because we know that that's a big barrier to care for folks. And then our fourth kind of principle that upholds this kind of health justice piece is that we want to build a healthier Georgia, so that we know that most people's health happens outside the actual healthcare system or health insurance systems. And so we know that we have to be a part of building a state that fosters healthy people. And that means, a strong education system. It means good economic opportunities. It means, all of the transportation, it means, and internet connectivity and all the things it takes to kind of have a thriving, successful, healthy life for folks. So, we kind of think about it in those ways as an organization, but we also, of course, kind of use our principles and our vision of justice to define our policy priorities and to help us kind of hone in on those each legislative session. And I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about kind of how we craft our policy priorities. And I'm also going to put in the chat a link to ours this year so that you can kind of see what we have staked out for this 2-year cycle. And I'll talk about kind of our 2-year cycle in a little bit. So, when we create our policy priorities for each legislative session, one thing we do is that we talk with our partners. So we talk with folks at the Lupus Foundation. We talk with our friends, you know, at AARP, at Voices for Georgia's Children, at Center for Black Women's Wellness, a whole bunch of partners that kind of span, you know, constituencies in Georgia, and try to get an understanding of, you know, what their priorities are going to be for the session, and also kind of what they feel like the greatest needs are for their populations. We also, of course, look at the data. So what does the data say about what consumers in Georgia need? You know, are we seeing a, you know, like rapidly rising healthcare prices? Or are we seeing, you know, this year, are we seeing a giant global pandemic? You know, that kind of thing. So what does the data say about what consumers need in Georgia? And then also kind of year round, we collect input from individual consumers like you all, through, you know, these kinds of events. So through community engagement, and also through story collection. We do a lot of kind of one-on-one conversations with people about their health experiences, and we kind of call that story collection. And those kinds of activities. So we try to kind of pull all of that together. And essentially that's kind of our first draft list of our policy priorities. And then we kind of refine it from there, based on, you know, kind of what we think kind of needs to be said, for to legislators and to decision makers in during the legislative session, and kind of what maybe sometimes realistically, sometimes unrealistically can get done during the session. We try to be practical at times, but sometimes things are too important to be practical about, right? So, so sometimes you just put in a priority, not because you think maybe it can get done this year, but because it's too important not to say that it's a priority. So that's kind of how we stake out our priorities each legislative session. And, you know, for us as advocates, it's really helpful to have kind of that set of goals that we think move us to health justice. Another thing that I think kind of defines advocates as people is that they're very resilient people, right? So these folks are not easily put off. They're not easily defeated. And I brought a little show and tell for this, and I'm gonna hold it up. Hopefully you guys can see it, but it says, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." And a friend of mine sewed this just in the I think it was the first quarter of 2017, and she gave it to me. It was you all may remember that was the beginning of a new presidential administration. It was a tough time in the health advocacy world. I had just transitioned kind of into my executive director role, and it just felt like the whole world was falling in, and there were just a lot of challenges that felt a little too big to overcome. But this hangs on the wall next to my bed and kind of reminds me to kind of be resilient, to be the seed, and that they're always going to try to bury us, right? That the insurance system and the health system weren't built to be accommodating for people, and so we're going to have to be resilient and not be defeated, and that is kind of a defining feature of advocacy. Also at the same time, the Congress has just started to debate repealing the Affordable Care Act, so that was like, not great. It's keeping me up at night. But we succeeded there, right? So like that, the resiliency and the persistence, and we all succeeded there. So I'm sure that you all were individually all a part of that effort, and to keep the law in place. And I brought along, I actually have one other link to share with you guys to kind of demonstrate the resiliency and persistence. There's an issue that GHF has worked on for almost as long as I was at GHF. So in 2015, we partnered with a group called Georgia Watch to address surprise out-of-network medical bills. And this was an issue that we were seeing across the country. Data demonstrated that it was happening a lot in Georgia as well, that people would go to a hospital that was in network or a facility that was in network. They would, so presumably all the providers are in network. Well, it turns out that insurance doesn't work that way, and people might accidentally and unknowingly encounter out-of-network doctor at an in-network facility. And then they get billed an out-of-network rate for it and have this exorbitantly high medical bill, right? So so this was obviously a big problem. It was just really sticky. And so we in 2015 kind of launched this effort to try to pass legislation to protect consumers from that in Georgia. And we just kind of hit a wall. We had very broad bipartisan agreement that the issue needed to be solved. But we just kind of kept hitting a wall year after year after year about like what was the right solution to this problem. And then, by year 3, we were like, can we beat our heads against the wall anymore? And we did. We continued to. And then in year 4, we were kind of like, we're going to take a back seat. We're just going to breathe for a minute and see like how this works out. It still didn't get resolved in year 4 of this effort to try to get protections. And then between year 4 and year 5 of, and these are legislative session years that I'm referencing, but between the 2019 and the 2020 legislative session, we sat down and said, can we think of maybe a different way to go about this, trying to solve this problem? And so we thought really creatively, and we talked to a bunch of folks who are experts in surprise billing, and kind of came up with essentially a mediation between House leaders and Senate leaders who wanted to get surprise billing legislation passed. So the Senate had one approach and the House had one approach, and that's kind of where we got stuck every year, and they just could not agree on the approach. So we essentially brought in like mediators to negotiate what a solution might look like. And we did that before the legislative session started. And we're able to come up with a compromise bill that still did what it needed to do and protected consumers and was a really good, strong solution. And so after 5 years, we were able to get that done even in the midst of the pandemic last year. So a little example of resiliency and persistence. And that was it. Yeah. And so I think that's a defining feature of advocacy. And I'm sure you all know that as well, both in your own self-advocacy and also in your advocacy with elected officials, that sometimes you just really have to try again. I have 2 more kind of definitions of for advocates, or I guess defining characteristics. One of them is that advocates work in community and partnership. So advocates don't do their work alone. And I have one more show and tell piece for you guys on this one too. It also hangs next to my bed. And at the top, it says all together now. And it's like a bunch of little hands that make a big hand. I hope you guys can see that. Anyway, if you can't, I hope I described it well enough. And that's kind of what advocates do, right? So there's, it's very rare that you can get something done at the Capitol by yourself, or in any big policy or system, right? So if you're trying to address hospital billing practices in a particular hospital system, it's hard to do that as like one individual or one advocate even, or if you're trying to address like a US federal law, that's even harder to do as like one individual person. So it's inherent as advocates that we build community, that we work in partnership, that we kind of come together to find common goals and work towards those as a group and as a collective. And so I think as advocates, for that reason, we're all, very connected to each other and have strong networks. And I think that helps to make the most successful kind of advocacy efforts, is when you've got those trusted relationships with other people who see the goal and who will work towards it with you in kind of full faith and transparency. And then the final piece of, or kind of defining feature in my mind for advocates, and I would love to hear if you guys have additional ones as well, is that advocates are adaptable and strategic. So as advocates, we like to have a plan, right? You like set up your plan. You're like, here's how we're going to get this done. And then and then a pandemic hits and you're like, whoa, we got to change the plan. Well, even in a smaller form, that happens all the time. So for example, this legislative session, one of GHF's things that we wanted to get done was we wanted to address kind of a wonky topic called network adequacy. And that's kind of about how insurers are insurers putting enough providers in a network to make sure you have adequate access to care. It turns out mostly in Georgia, there's not enough providers in any insurance network to make sure you've got good care. So we want to really address this in policy. Well, we talked to the legislator. We were like, great, you're going to sponsor the bill. Here's the model legislation. We had everything in place. And then kind of the partner lead sponsor on the bill put out a different bill, also about a very important topic. It just wasn't the one we thought we were going to be working on. So now we're working on this other bill this session. And so we kind of had to get up to speed really quickly. We had to create kind of a new plan. We're flying by the seat of our pants a little more than we had kind of planned to this session, but that happens all the time, right? As advocates, you just kind of go with the flow, and you while also holding tight to that like vision of justice, right? So you have to kind of, at GHF, actually, we have a framework for this. We call it our 3 Ps approach. So is this thing we're working towards powerful? And for us, that means, does it align with our mission and vision? So does it get us towards health justice? How does it position? How does it position? So, and for us, that means, can GHF bring something unique or valuable to the table to help get this done? So is there something special about GHF that kind of helps move this forward? And if not, then we kind of take kind of a more of a backseat kind of supporter position, because it's really important also to have kind of those backseat supporter people too. And then our 3rd P is practical. So how can we make progress towards this with the resources available to us? And sometimes those resources are, do legislators or lawmakers care about the issue? And if we, and again, as I mentioned before, sometimes that practical P is the least important P. Sometimes you work on the powerful and the position priorities, even if it's not practical. And GHF, probably our best example of this is we have been just shouting from the rooftops about Medicaid expansion for 8 years now. And here we are 8 years later without Medicaid expansion. So we know that like practically it's probably not going to get done this year, but we know that it's too important and that GHF does bring something special to the table around Medicaid expansion that we can't not make it a priority and work towards it. So that's kind of the framework that we use around kind of being adaptable and strategic, and kind of making the most of the moment. And so we kind of use that 3 Ps approach to kind of think through that. So I think I'll stop there, because that's the end of kind of what I think defines an advocate. But I do want to hear, if you guys want to drop in the chat what you if there's other additional things that you think kind of define advocates. And my guess is that all of you kind of see some of those things in yourselves. At least I hope you do, because I'm sure all of you have bits and pieces of all of those things. So I'll stop there. I think Christopher probably has some questions, as well as you all having questions.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Great conversation. Great explanation about how things work down, both at GFHF as well as the Capitol. I love that you use the words resiliency and persistence, because I think that encompasses the lives of a lot of us who live with lupus, is constantly trying to be as resilient as possible, and not only, I guess, trying to live day by day, but also be able to remember that we can continue to move forward. And wanted to know from, I guess, from that standpoint, how when you have a legislation, say for example, Medicaid expansion, how do you continue to push forward when there are so many roadblocks, particularly in this state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think we do that in a couple of different ways, and I'm guessing that you all have kind of used some of these strategies too. One is that we always take the long view. So, we may not get it done this year, but whatever we're doing this year is going to build towards getting it done, whether it's 1 year, 5 year, 10 years down the road. So, and we also see this around, we do advocacy to try to raise the tobacco tax in Georgia too. And often that we know the governor is going to veto that, which means the legislature won't even take it up in the first place. But every year we think it's valuable to kind of build people's understanding about the issue and how that issue can be addressed through either legislation or the budget or whatever. And it turns out it is. So, for example, in Medicaid expansion, that is part of the Affordable Care Act. It is the part of the Affordable Care Act that should have covered low-income adults in Georgia. And because it was part of the Affordable Care Act, it got tangled up in a lot of the misinformation and scare tactics about, quote unquote, Obamacare in 2010 and, through 2012 and really the entire the last decade of healthcare policy. So a lot of legislators and the public don't understand the issue because it kind of got twisted and malformed in the public conversation at the time. So we are still doing a lot of straightening out of the facts. So some of it is kind of just laying out the facts and continuing to kind of repeat those facts over and over and over, because it turns out fewer people know those facts than you think know those facts. And some of it is, trying to find new creative ways to go about the advocacy. So, for example, this year, GHF has joined with 7 other Southern states. So Georgia is part of this coalition called Southerners for Medicaid Expansion. So that has kind of helped kind of keep everyone's energy up, and because now we can kind of advocate for an entire region that doesn't have this policy. So just kind of trying to be creative, again, coming together with partners and doing that brainstorming and getting new ideas. That's also the benefit of having partners, is that there's, lots of different brains and thought processes at the table. So everyone has ideas that they can contribute.
Okay. Several of the people on the call are support group facilitators for the chapter. Yeah. And, we have, if I look through the list alone, we have people who represent South Georgia, Middle Georgia, North Georgia, and then Metro Atlanta. And I guess I'm a support group leader as well, specifically for men with lupus. And it's, I guess my question is, how do you encourage people who are not necessarily born advocates or get the drive to really move forward and try and take at least, just the smallest step towards advocating not only for their health, but for the health of others?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 really easy ways to start, and to help kind of people feel maybe the advocacy bug a little bit. One is to practice storytelling. So talk about, when you're comfortable or in a way that's comfortable for people, and everyone's is going to look different, but kind of how would you talk about lupus and why it's important to support people or the lupus community, or to make it easier for people with lupus to get healthcare. So what is the kind of the story about kind of why that stuff is important for
Right.
you as kind of an individual. So I think doing some storytelling is a really powerful way to do that. And as advocates, often stories are they're just whew, that's the like gold pot at the end of the rainbow that can often like help kind of a piece of legislation kind of get over the finish line or not. So stories are really important. And then, you know, I would say doing some kind of basic education with family and friends or social media networks or, you know, people who maybe don't have like direct knowledge of the health issue or in this case, lupus, but so maybe it's a cousin or aunts and uncles or you know, kind of the neighborhood meeting, just kind of talking about like what is lupus and like, you know, what is it like for families to kind of be managing a lupus diagnosis and what can people do to help people with lupus. So I think helping just do some like basic, you know, kind of community education about the issue is also a really good place to start. And often at that, people will ask like, well, how can we help? And then it's really easy to say, oh yeah, well, I heard about like this bill or this, you know, thing, and maybe just like call your senator or something. So there's kind of a natural transition there.
So I guess a follow-up to that would be, how do you translate that into language for a specific bill or language for the specific ask that one may has? Like the stories, yeah, I agree, the stories are the most important thing, and that's what we impart on our advocates at the chapter.
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes sometimes it can be difficult to translate that into a conversation, or really translate it into a bill that's up for discussion, particularly if it's not one that actually hits home.
I agree. That is like the perpetual challenge, right? You know, I often think about like, how would I describe this to my sister? My sister is in like the hospitality business. So she's a smart lady, but healthcare is not her deal. So like, how would I kind of talk about it to her? And sometimes it does take a little bit of practice about like, you know, how do I describe what this does and why it's important? But I think drawing the like, you want to say like, do you want to describe like what it does in a sentence or two, but you also want to say like, and it's important because of this, because people don't always say, you know, think or make that connection in the way that maybe those of us who are very familiar with the health system may. So yeah, so I think saying like it's important because it impacts me in this way, or it impacts, you know, people I know in this way. I think that is the really important part of the pitch.
Yeah, definitely. I think we had, I know there was someone mentioned in the chat about Medicaid and Medicare expansion and disability, and one thing that I hear oftentimes is how the powers that be, who kind of determine whether someone qualifies for disability, they don't truly understand the condition lupus, because it varies so much from person to person. And I've always wondered, just from kind of an academic standpoint, you know, how do you redefine the laws that are established to determine if someone's disabled? Really, if you know, they're trying to encompass thousands of conditions at Social Security, how do you really educate people, I guess, on a larger scale for a smaller scale issue?
Yeah, that is hard. And I think some of that gets at like that deservedness piece, like, are you deserving of this support to take care of yourself? So I think, yes, we have to like deal with like the specifics in the law about like how do we define disability and like what qualifies for that, but also like I think our collective work, all of you on this call that kind of always are advocating for your own care, and those of family members and those of us who are paid or professional advocates, we're always kind of building that, like trying to build that understanding with decision makers that everyone deserves care, everyone deserves this kind of dignity. I think that collective work is going to be really important for kind of, in addition to kind of that very granular, do we need to change the language of the law? Because in the long run, I think we just like government and systems just need to understand that everyone deserves that support.
Mhm.
And it's not about whether you're worthy because you work or something.
Right, right, right. And I think for lupus, I mean, in a way, I look at it, lupus patients don't fall within a square at
Mhm.
all. They're not, they don't, it's just because we're so different, because our condition's so different.
Yeah.
What, one thing that I've heard mentioned, and I think it's because we've been down to the Capitol. I don't even remember exactly how many years, but I know it's over 12 years. Speaking to members of the legislature as well as the governor, and I've heard references, specifically from Governor Kemp or even Governor Deal, that lupus is a financial burden on the state. What can we do to really galvanize if that train of thought is out there? What can we really do to really take what seems to be a statement and turn it into actual action?
Yeah. That one's also tricky. Well, I think one thing that that you all have going for you is you have a champion in Representative Schofield. And of course, she was a health advocate long before she was a representative. So it's been nice to see her kind of develop in that way. But having a champion who is there in the ears of other decision makers, who has a personal connection to lupus, is just invaluable. And I think building a few more of those along the way would be is always beneficial. So I know for a fact that Representative Schofield is always going to bat for the lupus community, and it is never far from the front of her mind. But having a couple more is always helpful, because then, of course, decision makers are hearing it from a number of places and not just one. And then I think also connecting with other groups that represent people with other chronic diseases and identifying what kind of some of those common goals are. So, maybe the lupus community and the I'm pulling out a random one, but like diabetes or arthritis communities, maybe you all have some like very similar or very overlapping goals, and working towards those together can be one way to kind of make sure things continue to move forward, even if it's maybe not specifically kind of a lupus initiative, but it's kind of a broader one that kind of brings together more partners. But it's just really hard. And again, sometimes it's just that like year after year after year education, and then at some point there's kind of a critical mass. So just sticking with it too. There's not a secret sauce.
Definitely, yeah. And that was kind of a follow-up. My follow-up was the question of how to sustain the work that we are doing. Certainly, like we have those years in which it rains and it's cold and rainy, and none of us want to go out, let alone the leaders of the group. But really, how to sustain the work that we do within the Capitol every year, but also, politics is also local, and we try and have our local advocacy days where, in which, like in my community, I try and go at least speak at, a county commission meeting about lupus, or, have the day declared Lupus Awareness Day. So really, particularly for the individuals here who live in smaller communities, how to really maintain and really work with our local officials to really galvanize the idea that lupus is an important issue, not only for the state but even local communities.
Yeah, well, so I think sustaining between sessions is actually the more important time to do the advocacy work, right? So like sometimes we think about the legislatives, or I don't know if anybody else thinks about it this way, but I think about it sometimes as like the Olympics. So everyone's paying attention during the Olympic year to these like sports that nobody pays attention to the other three the intervening 3 years, right? And
Right.
same with legislative session. It's like 1/4 of the year, nobody's paying attention the other 3/4 of the year. So having those kind of doing that relationship building with decision makers between sessions, like that's the most valuable time to get them. You can get them for like an entire meal or a couple of hours, whereas during session they might have like 10 or 15 minutes maybe.
Mhm.
So doing that relationship building between sessions before you, like maybe even before you have an ask, you know, your ask of them is just like kind of follow up with you, you know, with like a fact sheet so you can learn a little more, and inviting them to events, and doing that kind of local work too about kind of building awareness and understanding in local communities, because that's really like, you know, that's where the power is at, right? I mean, we've seen that around elections and voting, right? Is that it's neighbors talking to neighbors, talking with neighbors. So that is the other kind of piece of like that between you don't have time to do that during the legislative session because you need something, you know, like the ask is like, we need people to call whoever right now. It has to be today before this hearing. So you have to kind of do the education in the community and do that kind of on the ground community organizing beforehand. So again, you know, it's not glamorous and there's not a secret sauce, and none of it happens fast. It just takes like time and relationships and kind of persistence all the time and forever.
I have two more questions. One, I don't know how I'm going to phrase the question, but when you've talked about access to healthcare and being set, it's you know, one that was the impetus for you really going into advocacy was the lack of access to healthcare, and you know, that's for me, that's an important aspect of advocacy as well. But when we're talking about access to healthcare, we're talking about not only transportation, but we're talking about telemedicine, broadband. There are, you know, a myriad of topics that need to be incorporated into that one broad subject, but really need to be kind of dealt with, I guess, on a smaller scale to get it done, or you know, bring together coalitions, I guess, who are specifically focused on this one tactic. So, say for example, if telemedicine is really on our mind here in the lupus community right now, and how does one, I guess, approach such a large issue from an advocacy standpoint, from bills to legislation to action?
Yeah, that that's tough too. So I mean, I think you can go about it any number of ways, right? Often it's helpful to have an expert in these kinds of things. So I mean, like, for example, GHF, we know we're not an expert on telemedicine. So we kind of look around and look at who is an expert and what does the data say about this? So having kind of an expert who is kind of really that, maybe they're not great at advocacy, but they kind of know the ins and outs of telemedicine. That person is nice to have as part of the coalition that is built. I think, you know, trying to identify some specifics like within telemedicine is helpful, or any big issue is helpful too. So like, here are like the urgent things that need to get done, and here are like kind of what falls underneath that we'd like to get done eventually. And that can help make it a little more bite-sized, right? So, and it is often easier to do bite-sized stuff than big sweeping things. That's why the Affordable Care Act was hard. So I think if it can be made bite-sized, that's nice to do, but But I will say the appeal of bite-sized things is not as much. So sometimes having the bigger idea piece helps to kind of gain that support because it appeals maybe to more people. It's a little more aspirational. It, you know, kind of it moves people a little more. So I think just trying to find the balance between those things is that's where it's at. I mean, advocacy is more art than science, right? So so I think, you know, I think building the coalition, kind of having that expertise at the table, and then, you know, making tough choices about whether to go big or to do kind of the patient bite-size stuff is that's how to get it done. But there's no one right answer.
Okay. And the last question, what can our lupus advocates do to support Georgians for a healthy future?
Oh man, I didn't, you know, usually make notes beforehand to like prep, and I didn't think about this one ahead of time. But I mean, you guys are doing a lot of the work now, just by like, you know, being active advocates with your elected officials. That helps support you and us. But you know, one of our biggest priorities is that big, hairy Medicaid expansion goal. So please sign up for email updates at coverga.org. And then when we send out action alerts, if you guys could do the action alerts, that would be very helpful, especially those of you in South and Middle Georgia, because legislators know that, you know, crazy liberals in Atlanta believe in Medicaid expansion, but they need to know that real humans in South and Middle Georgia also believe that everyone should have health care, including folks who would be covered by Medicaid under an expansion program. So, so sign up at coverga.org.
Well, Laura, I want to really thank you on behalf of the Lupus Foundation of America Georgia chapter for joining us this evening and really imparting a lot of knowledge on us. We certainly do appreciate all the efforts you do yourself, as well as the work that Georgians for a Healthy Future does for all of Georgia. And certainly look forward to us being back down at the Capitol next year and really being able to really take some of the words you've used and begin working on them, hopefully within the next few months. Really try and sustain the work that we're doing now. So I want to definitely thank you on behalf of the group. Want to remind everyone that next week, March 25th at 7 p.m., we're going to have a little bit of a small training session, as well as an opportunity for us all to really learn how to really talk to our legislators. You know, we talked a little bit about that tonight and even last week, and it's time for us to take what we've learned and really apply that so we can begin doing it and sustain the work that we're doing here as a chapter. So I want to thank all of you again this evening. Thank you to the team. Thank you to Terry Iman, Nicholas Hatton, who is our event coordinator. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Chris.